This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
(11:08) at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast. And welcome to our twin doctor, Rabbi Shafir Loeb.
And this is Rabbi Shafir Loeb of Congregation Eitz, Chayim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast. And what a crazy couple of weeks it's been. And I know that Stuart talked about the COVID and the Delta variant and all of that. And I know that our board is actually going to have another meeting this Sunday. We want to thank St. Andrews, and I don't know we've got some serious questions to ask with the variant as it's sitting right now and the numbers that aren't going down.
Yeah, Tom Kindred from IRSC last night mentioned apparently his minister passed away from COVID, 54 years of age.
Wow.
And he said,
was he vaccinated?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, he just said that, and he's experiencing the same thing that Carol and I are. It's like the first time around, we didn't seem to know anybody. Now we know a lot of people.
Well, there's a lot more people.
True.
Right. When you look at the chart, right, it went up, it went down, it went up, and it went down, and now it's like
skyrocketing.
The sky.
Yeah.
I was just one of the congregations that we have a spiritual virtual link with is something called the Pico Union Project in California. And they just posted yesterday that they are going virtual again this year.
Wow.
They were looking forward to having this wonderful in-person experience with people being vaccinated. And California isn't as bad as Florida. It's not good, but it's not as bad as Florida. And they just made the decision to go virtual. I know many other congregations. Sometimes we've got some folks on Facebook that are from Tucson, and a couple of the Tucson congregations have decided to go virtual. South of us in Florida, congregations have decided we're going to look at it again. And
yeah, you've got to. It's like
it's irresponsible not to.
This thing's getting real weird. And of course, we're locally starting high school football next weekend, and it's like, I'm not sure about this.
It's going to be an interesting season. I predicted it was going to be at least 2 years way back when.
I know you did. Yeah, you've been saying that.
I've been saying that. This is at least a 2-year event, not a 1 year, and we're at that place. It's going to impact us this year, and we'll determine here in the real short future how badly it's going to impact us, because it will. It just will. There are many things that we are not doing as a congregation because of it, and I will tell you that this last plant sale, we saw far fewer people, not only at the plant sale, but even at even just walking in the office complex. There were very few people that I saw. Normally there are people standing in the parking lot.
Sure.
And just having what we call parking lot meetings
and
gatherings and things. And I did not see any of that this week. I did not see people clustering.
Well, we had one other major broadcast group this week say vaccinate or leave. Mm-hmm. They own about, I guess, 700 stations around the country, and it's serious stuff. And the guys in Miami, they were only in their brand new building for a few weeks. Are going back to their houses now, and it's like, oh brother, here we go again.
It's something that needs some serious attention. And I'll raise the question I've raised a couple of times in the past. I wonder how many of the past masking may not have been associated with pandemics that came through. We know this is not the first pandemic. We've talked on the show many times about the Spanish flu. Excuse me, the Spanish flu.
Mm-hmm.
I love how we name flus and other things by
bird flu and stuff. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Bird flu, not necessarily better. That's connected with birds carrying it. The Hong Kong flu was another one, and we name them by these really strange names. I think something like COVID-19 is probably a much more non-emotionally charged name, although certainly it's become emotional, but not the same kind of stuff of trying to pin a label. It's a human condition, I think, that we want to point a finger at somebody and blame somebody. And that's truly not constructive unless there's real power behind that. And for the most part, what that really does is just give us a focal point for emotions instead of our focusing on the things that we need to do to move forward. Excuse me, I've got this little frog in there today. Or a little cane toad, I don't know.
Hit the coffee.
I'm going to hit the coffee. One of the things that is hard through a mask.
We're going to have to get Starbucks to sponsor this show. You know, they've got product placement here. That's
They do.
$1,000 a week. Oh.
Well, if you can get that, I won't turn it down. I'll gladly show the bottle much more prominently.
Sure.
I get a kick out of that. One of my COVID picked up habits, if you will, is that I have been watching. I've been watching NCIS. Binge watching it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I think
It's one of our favorite shows.
season something or other now, and I've been watching it. It's interesting to watch it that fast, and I watch it kind of piecemeal. It's kind of funny because I have like 4 or 5 minutes between students when I teach the English.
Okay.
Because one class ends at 3:25, and the next one doesn't start until 3:30. So I've got some number of minutes, and I've got it up on Netflix on my computer so I can watch it as I get into the next class. And I've been binge watching it in 5-minute increments.
So your students in China can watch NCIS
No, they
with
can't
you?
see it.
Oh,
They can't
I
see
see. Okay.
No, I can't share screen. That is probably the saddest thing that I have, and I'm guessing that's either a shortcoming in their software or it's intentional. I don't know.
You just hit it. It's intentional.
Well, there's a possibility of that. Sometimes what I will do is I will play a video on my phone and hold it up for them to hear and see. I put it close to my mic. I've got this boom mic that comes out of my
headset
headset.
mic. Yeah.
And I'll hold it up to there, and I can hold it up to the camera, and they'll see the video because they don't have access to YouTube.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Only.
That makes sense.
Only in Hong Kong. Yeah, there's too much out there.
Yeah.
There's just too much out available. People in America don't realize the power we have by what we can and cannot see. There are videos that say not eligible in your country for you to watch.
Really?
That's true here too. Yeah, I've bumped into that a number of times. So.
Wonder if our YouTube channel says that. Not eligible
Not
to watch in
eligible
this
in America.
country.
Yeah. I don't think so. I've seen
Okay.
stuff on our YouTube.
Okay.
I've seen stuff on our YouTube. I have to thank you, though. You sent me an MP3. I had a request for an MP3 of one of the shows.
Yeah, Cliff did those.
And
Yeah.
thank you, Cliff. And I listened to it as much as I could. And folks, I apologize for the 9 million times I appear to have said I am going to curb that habit. I had not realized I had slipped into that. I'm one of those folks who does not like to hear myself, so I don't tend to listen to my shows. The downside of that is you don't learn about your errors. So I'm going to force myself to listen to bits and pieces of shows and try to improve. Because I think that we all can continue to improve, and that's an obligation of life. If you're going to live, then do something to make the world better. There was actually a great quip on NCIS attributed to Gibbs' dad, which was, "The world is bad enough. Don't do anything to make it worse."
Yeah, that's true.
And that's an interesting piece. The positive side of that was actually the episode I saw last night, which was about a sergeant, I think it was a sergeant, killed in Vietnam. And it was interesting to hear them talk about that as ancient history.
Sure. It is ancient history to a lot of people.
With the many Vietnam vets that I know, and thank you to all of them for their service.
I had a lot of buddies die.
Yeah. And this particular sergeant, the storyline was that he had been killed in a Viet Cong attack, and that they had to evacuate because it was a hot fire zone. And they came in the next morning wanting to retrieve the body, and it wasn't there. There wasn't any sign of anything from him there, and they were mystified by that, etc. Sometimes, bodies were taken, and there's a discussion of that. There's a group that is dedicated to bringing every fallen veteran home. And they still continue to search for bodies and missing.
Oh, you bet. Yeah.
Things like that. And so this story hooked into a lot of that. This particular sergeant, they had come into a village right after the Viet Cong had gone through it and basically killed most of the people. And there was a young boy there. And both of his parents had their throats slit in the attack. And they were just the bodies were laying there. And this sergeant helped the orphan, the son, to bury his parents respectfully and properly, and then they moved on with the rest of their operation. And he was actually the one who moved the body when the sergeant had been killed, and it looked to him like everybody had abandoned him. And so he took that body and he buried it next to his parents, and that's why there was no record of it, because he was a young boy hiding behind trees and things like that.
Right.
And it showed how he had honored the dead body of the sergeant, and the bottom line of it, he was able to go in and retrieve the dog tags and send those home. The real dog tags, not the fake tourist dog tags.
Right.
Because when the U.S. evacuated, as the show pointed out, they left behind a lot of equipment, much like what we're seeing in Afghanistan now. When things fall apart in evacuations, which they unfortunately have a historic habit of doing, we end up leaving a lot of things behind because people are more important than equipment, more important than files, more important than this and that. And so one of the things that was left behind in Vietnam were the machines that make the old dog tags. And I can remember as a child in the newspaper office.
This would be like presses or something.
It'd be like, it is. It's a linotype. You put the letters in, and then it's a very manual kind of printing press kind of operation, but using metal instead of paper. And as I said, I can remember the linotype for headlines and going, A, C, whatever letter it was coming. You did it one at a time. You did it in whatever font and whatever size. And if you didn't do it right, you got to do it all over again. And the same was true with the dog tags. There's little places where you put the letters, the essentially linotype letters, and you press this dog tag metal over it. And of course, with the tourist industry, they're using newer metal because that's what's available, and then they're aging it. They're making it look old. And the forensic scientist, Ms. Shudo, beautifully played, by the way.
Yeah.
She's excellent at that role. And she, of course, can see the chemicals on the dog tags and the fact that it's modern metal and that it's a fake. And they uncover a ring that's taking advantage of veterans' families that want something, that hunt for the name. And one of the things that had happened was that names had been left behind in the files. And so the industrious want to make dog tags for sale group got hold of some of those lists of names and etc. So many different ways, and it's always interesting to see the sidebars that happen in something like a show like NCIS.
Yeah, it really is. It's tremendous production, and they've been around for a long, long time. Changing a little bit this year, pretty dramatically, actually.
I will find out about that when I get to this season.
Oh boy, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's gonna be
there's
interesting.
there are shows that I had that, and I watch a number of different shows. I watch Grey's Anatomy. I had been watching Orange Is the New Black.
Never seen that.
Oh, that one's worth watching. At least I like it better in the early
Is
episodes.
that a Netflix show?
It is on Netflix, and it's also on Amazon Prime.
We don't have either. Okay.
Alexa can probably bring it up. For
Yeah,
me.
that's true.
Alexa
Never thought
can
of
do
that.
anything.
That's right. That's true. That is so true.
And I know that you have Alexa because you've talked about it.
Yep.
There are many things that we can do. And the other part that I'll mention with things like NCIS, shows like NCIS and Grey's Anatomy, the writers have to come up with plots every week or so during their season or during their shooting period. They've got to get these stories in. And what they do is they look at what's news and what's current and what they can Google that has happened, and then they shift it and change it and modify it for the show. And so to me, part of the interesting piece of it is to look up and Google some of these things and see what the underlying, because you can usually figure out what the underlying events are. They give you enough details or chemical names or something that they want to pin in reality, and so you can find what was it that they looked at. How did they tweak it? And that's an interesting sub-piece of how writers take ideas and stimulus and,
Sure.
and twist it and change it to make it fit the show's format.
We worked with a young producer at ESPN who has turned into a television writer. His name is Gil Grant, and they did a lot of NCIS and a lot of other major shows like that. And that young guy turned into a great writer. Yeah. Yeah.
There are some wonderful things that can happen there. Of course, television, beware. A lot of it's special effects. Thank you, Foley artists, for amazing sounds. I've gotten a little bit annoyed at the noise when you probably wouldn't hear it if you were watching somebody run, but if somebody's running through a field, you're going to hear
Oh, and sense around type
all that stuff.
audio?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All of the things that are put onto the...
Well, speaking of the television season,
Yes, sir.
COVID is kind of pushing it back a little bit. So a lot of the shows are October-ish.
Yeah.
We're saying October-ish.
Everybody's pushing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's when you're on a set, you're close, just kind of like we are here.
Well, and we're not that close
No.
because we're not. It's we're not face to face,
Right.
and none of us are facing each other than an occasional glance. You're aimed at your microphone, I'm aimed at mine, and Cliff's over there doing his thing.
What?
For those who don't know, that's what's in our studio here.
Cliff's doing his magic
It's the
on
three of us.
on the
there
Apple.
you go. Great shot.
Thingy.
Thank you. Thank you for that pan. Okay. That was well done, well timed. Nothing like live radio, right? There is nothing like a live show.
No.
It is totally a different dynamic, and I have to tell you, it's an interesting piece. As I looked last year at the High Holy Days that different congregations broadcast, the ways that they tried to make things look live, and you knew they weren't. And yet, it's amazing how many people were fooled and said, "Oh, well, they did that live." No, they did that 2 weeks ago live.
Right.
And you can tell we're gonna try to blend some things this year, no matter whether we end up doing a large in-person piece with distancing, and as I've mentioned, thank you St. Andrews for letting us have access to and rent the fellowship hall for the service. It's a big space. We're not going to have anywhere near that many people. We're going to decide if we're even going to do that much. But whether we do that or just do something in our own sanctuary, there will be more live pieces, because I get how important that is, even if it's only 3 or 4 people that respond. We've had some services where it really has been just me and Bill, my husband, or me and Marion Malkin, who's done an amazing job of being one of our techies for a non-techie person. And I say that with love to her, because she really isn't, but she's really working.
Turned into one.
Yeah, she's trying to step up and do as much as she can. And many times it's been just the two of them and me, or not. And as Stuart mentioned on Ask a Lawyer, it does feel different when there isn't the response. And what I did last year was that I had my husband read the responsive readings, and we recorded everything sitting in the home, because that was still so close to the shutdown and things were not really open yet again. They're much more open now, and yet not. And people are starting to get afraid and shy, and I think we need to look at those decisions and be aware and conscious. What part do you want to play in things? We're not going to be like the school districts. We are going to continue to offer the virtual. We've always offered a virtual option. We've always offered bringing that in. Somehow, thank you, Mevo, we should be able to do more, but I've got to use the computer and on the screen and figure out how I'm going to do that. And it might we'll be discussing it this weekend at the board meeting, what our options are and what we're going to do and how we're going to do it.
You just have to be safe. That's plain and simple. That's the bottom line.
It really is.
And in your group, are most of the folks vaccinated?
Yes. And in the group that comes on the average week service, they're all vaccinated.
Good.
And some are even triple vaccinated. A number of them have gone and gotten the boosters. So we've got this multi-generational group. We've got some young children. Those, of course, have not been vaccinated. And yes, they wear a mask in the building. That's not optional. And then we've got their parents. And then we've also got the middle, older generation. And then we've got some really good seniors, grandparents.
And I think you and I are up, November for the booster?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
good stuff.
It's not going to hurt you.
No.
Look at what we've done with smallpox and polio. And it amazes me that the folks who are anti-vaxxers, a lot of them have anchored into a study that was done linking childhood diseases to vaccines, and that study has been proven to be total garbage. And this gets back to one of the things I say in my classes. We choose to believe what we want. And so the anti-vaxxers are locking into this study that was so bad, so faulty, as to be called fraud. And they're hanging on it. They want that to be true. I don't know what the motivation is, and that might be a serious question. What's the motivation behind wanting that bad science, that fake science, to be, quote unquote, the thing you hang your hat on?
I think now it's become so political that, the far right is saying it's a control issue. It has nothing to do with
Has nothing to do with control.
It's a health issue.
You wear seat belts, that's a control issue too, right? Are you allowed to kill yourself in your car?
Well, you didn't wear seat belts in an airplane, for goodness sakes.
You're right. I love the flight attendants who say, if you've not been in a car since 1950, this is how a seatbelt works. They still have to show that. It is almost humorous.
You know, as many times I've been on a plane and I hear that demonstration flight after flight, and I'm thinking, why do they do it? Who's listening? But it's important.
It is important. They do need to go through it, and eventually you get to it. It's scary how many people don't bother to take out the little chart that shows where things are. It is important to know where things are. It's just important to be 3D aware of your surroundings. That's not stupid. That's not scary. That's not newbie or any of those things. So I think I am going to back up. You're right. It's been politicized. And with that politics, you are getting to the motivation, which is that it's identity related. So people have staked their identity on a position. And here's one of the things that I tell my students in class. You can change your mind without changing who you are.
Ooh, I like that.
You can change your mind
like that.
without changing who you are. Don't hook it into your identity. Be open to the new information that will dramatically change how you view something. One of the examples that I also love to use comes out of Stephen Covey in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. There's a story that he tells toward the back of the book where he is getting on a subway, or he's riding on a subway, actually. And a gentleman gets on with 2 young kids, and the 2 young kids are just out of control. They're all over, and they're bothering everybody. And it so happens that the man appears to be in a stupor, and he's just sitting there, and he's oblivious to what his kids are doing, and he's oblivious to everything else. And finally, Covey can take it no more, and he turns to the man, and he said, excuse me, could you control your kids a little bit, or something of that ilk? I forget the exact words. And the man looks up at him and says, oh, I'm terribly sorry. We're just coming from the hospital, and their mother just died. I apologize that I'm not being a good father. And did it change the behavior of the kids? Not at all. Did it change his lack of parental control of his kids? Not at all. Did it change Covey's opinion of what was going on? Absolutely. A new piece of information that dramatically changes your perception of what's happening. And perception is the bottom line. You can change your perception without changing who you are. You do not have to hook it into identity. You do not have to get defensive. It's okay to change your mind. You had your opinions and decisions, and it doesn't even matter if they're right or wrong. Those are false, in some ways, some false constructs. Was your opinion helpful? Was it constructive? Or do you need this new information to make it more constructive? Most people do the best they can. People don't go through life saying, well, I'm only going to give this 50% today. Yeah, you have days where you say, I'm not up to it. But you're really giving what you can in that day with everything else that's going on. That doesn't mean you can't give 60 or 70 or 100% the next day.
I shoot for 50.
I understand. Most people do the best they can under any circumstances.
Yeah.
People don't consciously decide not to.
Right. They are few and far between.
There are very few that and even, okay, now I'm going to go somewhere really strange. One of the most amazing things to me that I experienced in life that was an eye-opener for me, I'm a little vertically challenged, as you know, standing at 5'2" once upon a time. When I stand up straight and stand at attention. A little bit higher with heels. But we had 5 foot something cubicles, whatever those things were, the fake walls, in our bullpen at Goodyear. Everybody had their own little cubicle. And within each bevy of cubicles. There were little sinks and coffee stations and things like that. And I was making myself a coffee, and I'm not real visible from the cubicles, but you can hear what's going on in cubicles near you. I was accused sometimes of eavesdropping because, again, I'm short and they can't see me. So they didn't know if I was standing right behind the wall. And this particular time I was, and these two individuals were having a contest to see who could come up with the better rumor to spread.
Oh, gosh. Oh, no.
And, they were deciding, there's another
Sounds like our newsroom back in the day. Oh.
A sign of people who really do need to be working for their employer. They need to be working for their employer or doing something else. This was clearly not constructive. And in fact, it was harmful to the company and company morale. The criteria they were going to use was how many of them they got routed back. So they'd tabulate how many times they got a copy of this rumor, and whoever got the most won this contest. Truly people who needed work to do during the day. Whether they had it or not, they were doing this. And it astounded me that people would do something like that. It was an eye-opener for my naivete at the time. But even as I look at those folks, I don't think they were sitting down and saying, okay, how can we destroy the company? They just weren't looking at the repercussions and the consequences of their actions. They were playing a little game. And I have to wonder how many other times people play these little games that get out of control. That, I think, is a serious question. And we are reminded in scriptures that those kinds of things are not constructive. We need to do the things that help us live together socially, culturally, cohesively. That's the piece. So what is it in your personality, in your psyche, in your makeup that you can tweak? This is the time of year, Jewishly, for us to ask these questions. What piece can you tweak in who and what you present yourself to be? Not in who you are, but in who you present yourself to be to others, that you can improve.
That's intriguing.
What can you let go of? What do you need to add? And so the full circle on this is coming back around to what I said earlier, which is I'm working on the knows because now I'm aware of it. And hopefully I've used far fewer of them.
You have.
This episode. I guess I had slid into that habit.
We all do.
Don't do that to me. But if you'd like to give a call, I haven't done that, and that's one of the other things I need to work on, is giving the number to call in, 772-340-1590, so that we can see any questions that you might have. And we'll go from there. And
this is a special season for you.
It is. It's a reflective. We start the official repentance cycle this Saturday. We start Elul, the whole month of the Hebrew month of Elul, which is this lunar cycle. Judaism uses the lunar cycle, the month, if you will. And we have somebody? Okay, yay. Thank you, somebody, for calling in. We'll get that here just in a second. And we use the month, the lunar month, to measure it. And we are in the month of Elul, and at the new moon, it will be 5782. So who do we have?
Jerry is on the line. Jerry, you're on with the Rabbi.
Hi, Jerry. Thank you for calling.
Morning, Rob. Thank you. I was wondering about the Hammurabi Code growing up in the 60s. I heard a few times about the Hammurabi Code, and I understand that he led a Semitic people out of the desert and into Mesopotamia, which means between two rivers, in other words, Iraq. And I was just wondering about the cuneiform type of printing that you used on this done on copper sheets, or how was? I wonder if you were familiar with uniform printing, and if you could just tell us a little bit about the whole Hammurabi. I had heard this term growing up in the '60s, the Hammurabi Code. Mm-hmm. And the release that I look at in a book looked like it was done on copper sheeting. I just wonder if I could listen off air and maybe you could explain that.
Okay, thank you, Jerry, for the question, and I'll repeat it just real quickly here. You were asking about the Hammurabi Code and about cuneiform writing or cuneiform pointing as it's done pressed into various things. You mentioned being pressed into copper. Copper, of course, would be later. It would be into the Middle Ages instead of the Stone Age. So that's a later writing of it. Cuneiform was a form of writing because it was easy, using a set of basically triangular shapes in different patterns to represent an alphabet. It's an early form of writing because you could take something and chisel it and press it into, even as they started into the Iron Age and into the Bronze Age and additional metals coming on that are softer and easier to work, then you can press this in fairly easily. And it was a popular form of writing in the area Middle East, Lower Asia, that the Silk Road was already there, folks. To pretend that people didn't travel and communicate ideas and information up and down through Mesopotamia, through Egypt, through Ethiopia, the Cushites. All of that region is to not even read scriptures well. There's a story, we're going to read it for High Holy Days, when we read the binding of Isaac, the sacrifice of Isaac, or the almost sacrifice of Isaac, that Abraham does. At the very end of that story, there's a couple of lines in there that says, and they came and they told Abraham the news of his brother's family up in what is now Lebanon. And that, and what they're foretelling is the birth of Rebecca, I'm sorry, letting him know what's happened, right? So that there is family going on. And let's think about that a minute. Let's think about that a minute. I'm going to try to delete that previous comment there and recognize that these carriers knew who they were talking about. They knew who they were talking to. There is a message route system that still connects families all through, and it's not just from Lebanon down through what is now Israel, what would have been Canaan, or Canaan, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Is it Pinellas County or Peneus? Won't even touch that one, right?
No, that's that would be good.
And how you pronounce things. That route is well known. And additional cities, of course, do get built, as we see with Alexandria. Sometimes things like Alexandria are rebuilding of old cities and renaming them, another popular game of ancient times. But yes, there was some forms of writing, and they become more pronounced and distinct. The Hebrew writing that we have today in Torah is called Syriac. It comes from Syria, from Iraq, from places like Baghdad, Babylonia. Some of these names, they are connected, and some of the communities are very, very old. We can tell that by the archaeology and the work that's done in and around the cities. Thank you, ISIS, for tearing down some of that stuff and destroying some of the great history that we could use the science. But there was other forms of writing. What was originally Hebrew is now called Paleo-Hebrew, and it looks different, and you have to learn how to read it. It's a much simpler, much more pictographic alphabet than Syriac. Syriac had become the standard in the exile, and when Ezra and Nehemiah come back, they're writing in that alphabet. And there is a discussion in Talmud of how and when can you write texts, which texts can you write in this alphabet. And they decide that Torah and all of Scriptures should be written in Syriac. If we look at the Samaritans that live in and around Nablus, they have kept the older Hebrew, the Paleo-Hebrew, in their edition of Torah. They don't go as far into the books as Jewish scriptures do. They have far fewer books in their holy scriptures. But they have the early books, and they're in this Paleo-Hebrew. And it's one of the things that scholars have looked at. What are the differences between the Samaritan texts and what we call the Masoretic text, which is the traditional Jewish scriptures?
Now, can you read the Paleo?
I could at one time. I am not skilled enough right now that if you handed it to me, I'd be able to read it fluently.
You don't, because you don't use it.
I don't use it.
Yeah.
I have a beautiful vase at home that somebody gave me years ago that has the Paleo Hebrew on the top, and then it has the Syriac in the middle, and it's a beautiful piece.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's a beautiful vase, and I want to say it's the Shema, but I'm not 100% sure I'm remembering it correctly. But it's some piece of something of that ilk. So it's a cuneiform. It's not a cuneiform. It's a Rosetta Stone for me. It allows me to look back and forth. But there was a time when I was studying in Israel, I bothered to learn the old alphabet. And it was a serious piece in my transition to becoming embracing of transliteration. Because when they changed the alphabet to Syriac, they basically not translated, but transliterated Torah into the Syriac alphabet. It's not just a font change. It changed how they did vowels. It changed a couple of things to make it more readable for the population coming back.
Gotcha. Okay.
And only 10% to 15% of the population came back out of the exile. The rest stayed put. So there have been Judeans, Israelites that have been throughout the world, and some of these folks were part of the trade system. It's what Arabs did too. They were part of the trade system. Lots of people were invested in trade because even back then, you followed the money. You made your living making money. And that has not changed. Trade has been here. It's been part of the world. We're going to continue to do that. People had to write things down partially because they were carrying these messages and they wanted to be able to carry them accurately. And secondly, because you had to keep track of how many camels, how many sheep, how many this, how many that, how many bushels of myrrh, whatever you were trading.
You had to inventory.
You had to inventory it, and you probably also kept credit accounts with people. Because it just happened, and you had to have some kind of a way of tallying what the different coins of the realm were worth. You know, how many bolts of silk were worth how many sheep? What was it worth in China versus what was it worth in Yemen versus what was it worth in Amman? All of these places that they would have come and gone.
So who are the CPAs of that time?
The folks who could do numbers. The folks who could do numbers, who could read, write, and do numbers.
Sure.
It's one of the things that Jews have valued, probably because of this ancient trade route system that had existed way back when. There has always been a value and a treasure for reading, writing, and counting. And as you know, when people first came to Tucson, the folks who were responsible for setting up the town and making it the Pueblo what it really was were the people who could read, write, and do numbers.
That's true. Oh, yeah.
And that's one of the reasons for a Jewish influence, if you will, throughout America as America's growing up, because Jews made it a point to teach their kids reading, writing, and doing numbers. Not new, been around and not changed other than to add more technology to make it more modern.
Yeah, but it's still the basic stuff.
It is still a basic stuff.
Sure.
And the folks who opted for an alphabet, often called Phoenician, but it was through much of the ancient world. That idea of writing things down, and it becomes Greek because Alexander takes it back, his folks take it back with him, and it influences the European alphabets, and even our alphabet of alpha, beta, gamma, A, B, C, D, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, the C slid in English, where it's a G in Cyrillic, Russian, and in Greek, alpha, beta, gamma, delta. You have to learn the alphabet in whichever languages. And we look at cultures where those business skills, those communication skills are valued and treasured, and we find a higher technology, we find a different impetus toward the things that are considered facilitating success in the American and in the European and the Asian markets. They're not the same in all cultures.
Okay.
When you see groups that are not as highly literate, you see a different set of values and stimulus. It is a challenge. It is a challenge to teach that. China and Japan, of course, went to pictograph writing. That is the ultimate form of keeping scribal things in your family. Because in the old days, where did you go to school before we had schoolhouses? You learned what you learned from your parents or the person to whom you were apprenticed. You learned what they did. And scribal things went down through families. And when they committed Hebrew to writing, they purposely did it without vowels to make it harder for outsiders to learn so that they could keep job security for the scribes. So that you needed somebody who could decipher and decode. That's what it's really called, by the way, is folks, when you sound out the words to make it harder to decode. And then we have something really strange like English. All the 15 million different ways that you pronounce OU or OUGH.
Right.
I love the I Love Lucy piece where she's trying to teach Desi how to read words with OUGH in it.
Sure.
I'll sometimes actually play that for
It's
my...
a classic bit.
Yeah, it's so funny. All
Yeah.
the different ways, is it through? Is it enough? Is it cough?
Yeah.
Yeah, is it thorough? How do you learn all these things? We actually do memorize big chunks of it without realizing it.
So going back then, of course, we've heard of the Navajo code, code
talkers.
Code talkers in World War II.
And that was like triple layer coded in Navajo. The Navajo code speakers spoke Navajo, but they also spoke a special form of Navajo so that if somebody who wasn't part of the code talkers got into it, they couldn't decipher it either. They came up with code words that the group knew.
So that coding system goes all the way back to the Talmud era.
And it goes all the way back to forever. People have always tried to hide things in plain sight. That's not new. And the challenge is trying to figure out when that's in use and when people are plain speaking. That's an old story. It's one of the big things that I try to work when I work with couples as a rabbi. One of the big things that I have to work through, especially when I'm working with newlyweds, is the decoding of the symbols. So if somebody walks in and says, John's not professional, what the heck does that mean? It means different things to different people. That's a code. The word professional is being used to mean a variety of things. And unless you dig through and say, what do you mean by that? What are examples of being professional versus not being professional?
Yeah. Makes sense.
When are you being Christian? When are you being Jewish? Those are also code words. When are you being a gentleman, not a gentleman? Lots of different things are really, really coded. And so there's multiple layers, and that's not even an intentional coding, like talking about silver bird for an airplane. something that makes sense, but it's
Right.
another layer of having to understand if are you talking about a bird or are you talking about a human-made object,
An aluminum bird.
an aluminum bird or a composite bird or whatever.
Yeah, whatever it is now, yeah.
Yeah, Kevlar or whatever. That wonderful fiber B, as Goodyear used to call it. And that was, that using fiber B was a way of trying to code it so that it was harder for people to know what you were talking about. So we try to pretend that we talk
Really?
plainly.
Huh.
But we really do need to parse it out, to get in, decode our coding. And, yeah, that's been around since dirt. Hammurabi's code, a very old code of how to treat each other. It's clearly that there are rules even in Abraham's day because Pharaoh is upset that what was then whatever pharaohs were called, the king of Egypt, is upset with Abraham because Abraham gives him Sarah as a wife and says, but she's yours. She's your wife. So there's already a code that you don't share certain things.
Yeah, a wife being one of
A wife being one of them.
Thank you.
Yeah, husbands being another. But
That's true. Yeah.
so there's clearly codes, and there's codes against stealing, and there's a code of transfer of property. We'll talk about that another time because I see the clock and I know that I'm well out of time. 1 minute. The transfer of the deed of the cave of Machpelah is an example of a practiced code that clearly existed before there was writing. This is Rabbi Shafir Loeb, and this has been Ask a Rabbi.
Tell us about the High Holy Days.
High Holy Days, you can go on the site www.eitzchayim.org and register there for either virtual or in-person services at this point.
And more on your website after the Sunday meeting,
after
right?
the Sunday meeting, we'll update it.
Wow. I hope it's in person.
I hope I know we'll have some part in person. We'll just see how and where that folds out.
Okay. All right. You have a good week.
You too. Take care. See you next week. God willing.
You've been listening to Ask a Rabbi right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie. Talk of the Treasure Coast, webcaster to the world.